Welcome into the On3 studios here in Nashville, Tennessee. It is the Inside Scoop. Today's Wednesday, June 26th. I'm your host, Josh Newberg. A lot of five-star intel today on the Scoop, some major developments all across the country. We have so much to talk about because June official visits are over. We're in the dead period, but as you know, during a dead period, things are anything but dead. Just this week alone, lots of commitments. Now I'm going to break it all down, but before we get into it, hit subscribe to the On3 Recruits channel, the best recruiting channel on all of YouTube. Make sure you guys are subscribed. All right, let's take a look at who committed this week. Some of the major, these are all the top 200 recruits that committed this week. Isaiah Gibson, now he decommitted from USC last week. Not a big surprise that he picks Georgia, but he only waited 6 days as he decommitted to commit to the Dogs. Then you got Zion Grady. He was a one-time Alabama commitment that decommitted in the wake of Nick Saban retiring. And coming out of that one, he visited Georgia a lot. He was at Florida State. He was at Miami. He took an official to Auburn. But it was the Buckeyes. They land him. It's a huge get for Ohio State. And then you got CJ Wiley. Probably of all the commitments this week, probably the biggest surprise. It was Georgia, it was LSU, and Florida State in this recruitment. And it didn't matter. Any expert for any company thought Florida State was running in third heading into this decision. CJ Wiley, though, picks FSU yesterday. And Florida State gets another one in Kevin Wynn. So they got two top 200 recruits in just the past 2 days. Big pickups for the Seminoles. Also, Oklahoma gets athlete CJ Nixon, and Oregon lands Brandon Finney. So let's take a look now at the top 10. So how did some of these commitments impact the rankings? Here we go with the On3 industry team rankings. Ohio State, Georgia, LSU, Alabama, and Clemson. That's your top 5. But when I'm looking at who's going to be really, truly competing for the number 1 spot, I think there's 3 teams right now that I think have a shot to end up finishing number 1. Those 3 teams, obviously Ohio State because they're number 1, but Georgia's trending, and I think Alabama. Just based on where things stand. Now, LSU, of course, but they did lose DeCorian Moore, the number 1 wide receiver in America, and I think they're in a great spot, and they certainly could finish number 1. But just with what's left on the board and what's trending where, I think Ohio State, Georgia, and Alabama will be competing for that number 1 spot. Now, rounding out the top 10, you got Notre Dame, Auburn, Oregon, A&M, and Oklahoma. Now let's turn the page because there's some other programs knocking on the door. They want in. USC at 11, Tennessee at 12, Penn State 13, Florida State 14, Michigan, Texas, Rutgers, Missouri, Miami at 19, and Wisconsin holds down the 20 spot. But it makes me wonder. I look at some of these programs sitting in 11 through 20, and I can't help but think several of these, or maybe a few of these programs, will finish inside the top 10 when it's all said and done. I mean, Miami at 19, then you got Texas at 16, Michigan, I don't know, but Florida State at 14, Tennessee knocking on the door at 12, USC at 11. I think all of those teams that I just mentioned have a shot at finishing in that top 10. So that makes me wonder, who in that top 10 are we bumping out? Well, maybe Clemson, maybe Notre Dame. I don't know. Auburn, they look pretty strong at 7. Oregon, I think they're holding steady at 8. A&M, there's just so much on the board for them still. Oklahoma, I mean, they might have a tough time holding on to a top 10 class, but there's a lot of teams that want in that top 10. So we're just going to have to see how this all shakes out between now and National Signing Day. I mean, this is just setting the stage for what is going to be a wild July and August, because a lot of these top prospects want to make a decision before their senior year. They want to get rid of the distraction. They want to end their recruitment. So we're going to see dozens and dozens of top prospects coming off the board. So it was fun to take a look at the top 20 as it stands right now, because there's going to be a big shakeup. I can feel it coming this summer. All right. Let's get to the show. Today, we are talking Alabama, we're talking Georgia, and we're talking USC. Yep, we're going to talk JuJu Lewis from the USC perspective. Big show today. Let's get to it. Let's talk Alabama recruiting, because nobody in the country might be hotter right now on the recruiting trail than Alabama. In today's video, I got the great Tim Watts from Bama Online. We're going to break down a few recruits that, if they go Alabama's way, the Tide could be making a run at the #1 recruiting class in America. But first, guys, be sure to hit subscribe to the On3 Recruits channel. We love talking Alabama recruiting. We're going to do it all off season long, so go ahead and hit subscribe. All right, let's bring in my guy, Tim Watts. And Tim, we got picks on the recruiting prediction rolling in favor of the Tide for the #2 running back in America, Akeelan Deer, a.k.a. Deer. But the thing is, he's committed to Ole Miss. What are we hearing? What's the buzz in his recruitment as he's coming off an official visit to Alabama?
You know, it's kind of got to be rough for the Ole Miss fans. They had 3 decommitments last night in a couple of hours. Woke up this morning to A.K. Deer. Now, I think Alabama's been trending for A.K. for some time. Even when he committed to Ole Miss, it seemed a little bit out of the blue. We had heard really good things. He'd been over for an unofficial visit. And, look, he's been familiar with that campus and that staff before Kalen DeBoer. You also got to remember Robert Gillespie has built that relationship over a few years. So it's not like he's a new staff member. He's been at Alabama for a while. So obviously that played in. So when he committed, a little bit out of the blue, but he said he was going to take visits. Alabama was one of those. And then right now we just think that they did a good enough job. And coming off the visit, I mean, if you read the quotes and the stories and all of his social media, you knew Alabama was involved. But, you know, now at this stage, I mean, everything's pointing to Alabama landing it.
All right. Alabama fans, keep an eye on that one as we head into the weekend. Now, if Alabama is going to make that march to be a #1 recruiting class in this 25 cycle, they're going to have to land a couple 5-stars. And a big one's coming off the board later this week. I think on Friday. Friday is the date. 5-star California cornerback Dijon Lee is going to make his decision. Tim, Tide are trending here on the recruiting prediction machine, but who is the biggest competition as we're just a couple of days away from his decision?
You know, I think Georgia was mentioned. You know, back in April, there was a lot of Georgia vibes coming. We never felt that way at Bama Online. We always felt that Alabama did a good job. When Kalen DeBoer and Courtney Morgan arrived in Tuscaloosa, that was one of the first names mentioned that was associated with them from California. So we knew that they had a long-standing relationship. He came back several times. Georgia certainly was a team that pushed really hard for him. He had some other schools mentioned. He went to Texas, took a couple of other visits. But Alabama's always kind of been the staple there, the one that we're watching the closely. I think right now we have our prediction on Alabama. Feel pretty good about that. I don't think you could sleep on anybody when it comes to recruiting, but I think Alabama's put themselves in a really good position with him.
Man, it sounds like Alabama's going to stay hot this summer. One more we need to hit on, and that has been also trending to Alabama, is 4-star linebacker Dawson Merritt. Now, he's the #3 player in the state of Kansas, trending to Alabama on the recruiting prediction machine, and he recently told our Chad Simmons that this is going to come down to Bama or Nebraska. So, Tim, is it starting to lean in Alabama's direction?
Yeah, his commitment's been interesting because you look back in April, I'd have bet a decent amount of money he was going to be one of the first commitments in this class. Came to Alabama, was leaning heavily to Alabama. Props to Nebraska. They went all in. Matt Rule was heavily recruiting him. They did a good job pushing there. They got everybody around him. But something sort of kept coming back to Alabama. And we hear that recurring theme of, you know, comes back to Alabama with other recruits. And I think that, you know, it's winding down. He hasn't set an official visit date, official decision date, but we think that, you know, it's coming up. I think he's just ready to do it. It's probably been a tough decision for him. His social media kind of is hinting at some of the stuff that's coming up. But I think Alabama, again, has done a good job. You know, when you look at this, we keep talking about torrid pace, hot summer, all that. Literally in the South, it's literally unbelievably hot. But it's ironic that Alabama's mantra, their theme for this recruiting class was cold summer, and they have been extremely hot at the same time.
All right, Tim, we'll appreciate the update on Alabama recruiting. Alabama fans, talk to me. Can the Tide really make a run at the #1 class in America? You got UGA, you got Ohio State, but Alabama right there as well. Let me know, comment section below. Is this, in Kalen DeBoer's first cycle, a run at the #1 class? Let me know, comment section below. The Georgia Bulldogs are on a heater. After landing a commitment from 5-star edge Isaiah Gibson on Monday, UGA now has the #2 ranked class in America. Yeah, Ohio State still sitting there at #1, but for how long? In this video, we're going to find out who could be Georgia's next big commitment. I got Jake Rowe from Dogs HQ on this one. But first, Georgia fans, this is an exciting time. Make sure you guys are subscribed to the On3 Recruits channel. We're here talking Dogs recruiting the entire offseason. Go ahead, hit subscribe. All right, let's bring on my guy Jake Rowe from Dogs HQ. Jake, I'm going to throw out some names. We're going to find out who could be next. So let's just start with 5-star defensive lineman Justice Terry. And I want to start with him because he decommitted from USC right in the same 24-hour time span that Isaiah Gibson did, but he decided instead of going to Georgia last weekend, he took a visit to Alabama. So where do things stand with Justice Terry in Georgia?
Well, I mean, I still really like Georgia's chances for Justice Terry. I mean, I think Georgia is objectively the leader here. Now, I do believe Alabama is a threat. Anytime you go on campus in Tuscaloosa and you kind of see what they have to offer, even with Kalen DeBoer and the Nick Saban change and all that stuff, I mean, it's a fantastic place, and there's no doubt in my mind that Alabama is in the mix here. Yeah. I do think Alabama is probably Georgia's biggest threat, but I also get the feeling that Georgia is significantly out front right now. Now, does that mean that there's nobody else in competition? Not quite, but I do think that the sooner the better for Georgia. But whoever, whether it's Alabama, whether it's another school that really jumps into the mix, I feel like whoever does it's got a lot of ground to make up.
Yeah, I feel like you're being polite giving Alabama credit here. Justice Terry, this one is all Georgia. But the question is, when do you think he'll be ready to make that decision?
I don't think he's in any kind of hurry right now. Now, does that mean that Georgia could get him in a hurry if they really probably? I mean, they're pretty persuasive in that regard. Kirby Smart kind of made it happen really quick there with Isaiah Gibson. I know back when Justice Terry took his official visit to Georgia, there was some buzz there that Georgia was going to get him. That's when he was still committed to USC. I think Georgia's in a great spot here. You never say never, but I don't know that there's a timeline in his head right now, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And ultimately it's going to come down to whether the way he's recruited and whether Georgia can completely sell him and kind of just, get that thing over the hump and get him on the commitment list.
Yeah, and that's understandable. I mean, he was committed to USC for 3 or 4 months, so he's just fresh off that. It's been about 7 or 8 days. So Justice Terry, I like where Georgia sits, but yeah, I could understand him wanting to take a little bit more time. How about Bryce Davis, a really nice-looking edge prospect out of Greensboro, North Carolina? He's the number 9 ranked edge in the country, and he's just coming off this Georgia visit. Where do you think the Dogs sit with him, and could this be one where he's on that commit list soon?
I like Georgia in this one right now as well. The problem is, so there's a couple things at play here. Number one, kudos to South Carolina. They weren't in the top 3. They found a way to get him on campus for an official visit, and I've heard some chatter since then that South Carolina really kind of made a move for him. Clemson is also in the mix. I think it's probably Georgia, South Carolina, or Clemson. I don't really think Duke is a big-time factor in this one at this point. I like Georgia kind of having the nose, maybe head and shoulders a little bit out in front right now. But we're talking about a numbers issue for Georgia. You land Isaiah Gibson. You got Darren Akinabon in the mix already. Julius Holly is going to go sooner than Bryce Davis. Julius Holly, I believe, is going to go toward the end of this month, maybe. That one is going to be interesting because, Holly's a guy that his arrow's pointing up, man. I mean, his arrow is pointing up. We saw him at the Under Armour camp. I had a conversation with Charles Power about him. He's a fantastic player. He's a high upside guy, but Georgia has put in a lot of time and a lot of effort into Bryce Davis over a year, like 18 months, really. So I'm really interested to see how that one plays out because I don't see Georgia taking 4 guys at that, edge, even if it's a combo edge 5 technique type thing. So what are they going to decide to do with Julius Holly? We may have an answer based on, that, or they could, essentially try to take 3 or 4, at that position. So that's a numbers issue that Georgia's got to work out. But I really do, Josh, have a hard time seeing Georgia spend a year and a half recruiting this top shelf, one of the better edge prospects in the country, only to kind of fill up before they get a chance to get him on the list.
Hey, you can't take everybody, so we'll see how this one shakes out. First
come,
first serve. Now, the 2 Georgia prospects that decommitted from USC last week did not deter Elijah Griffin from continuing to visit USC. He was out in California last weekend. I felt like Elijah Griffin has been trending heavily to UGA throughout the summer. Where do you think things stand? Did USC make an impact here, or is Georgia still sitting pretty?
Man, anytime I know how I sound, I know how I look. I like LA. Okay, I love LA. I think it's awesome. I can't fault any of these kids for going out there and falling in love with it. So I'm sure he had a great time. I'm sure USC used to be in the mix. That's a storied program with a lot of good things to offer. I don't see Elijah Griffin ending up anywhere else other than Georgia.
Okay.
I mean, for the longest time, I feel like there's a connection there. There's a lot of legwork. I mean, you've seen people come and go. You've seen South Carolina come and go. Clemson, I think, took a really big swing at him, kind of faded back to the background. Georgia has really stood there kind of at the top of that recruitment for a very long time. And I'm just going to be surprised if he doesn't end up at Georgia.
Yeah, I feel the same sentiment. I would be shocked if he didn't end up at Georgia.
Yeah.
Just want to see where your head was at after that USC visit. Speaking of big-time targets taking visits to other schools, David Sanders, after visits to UGA, Tennessee, he was at Ohio State over the weekend. Now, we think that this could be maybe his final visit before a decision. That depends when this decision comes, because he could take one more visit at the end of July, because there is one visit weekend there. So we'll see how that works out. But what's your thoughts on David Sanders? Because technically maybe he could come off the board in the next month.
I don't see Georgia landing David Sanders right now. I think they're still in the mix. I think Georgia, if it has any cards left to play, which none of us know, then maybe, right? I mean, if they've kind of held something back and they're going to make a late push here, maybe that gets them back in the mix. But it seems like this one's been trending away from Georgia. Ohio State, Tennessee, both of those schools like really all in there with him. I mean, Georgia's been all in too. They've recruited him extremely hard. But it just seems like Georgia's kind of faded to the background. And the funny thing is Georgia's kind of faded. Clemson's kind of faded. And the Johnny-come-latelys in a sense with Ohio State and Tennessee have been the teams that are standing there at the top. It makes you wonder if there's another twist or a turn in this recruitment. Honestly, man, I met this kid at Under Armour a couple years ago, I guess in 2023. I met his family. I thought it would be kind of a very low-key, very quiet recruitment, and it's actually turned out to be a very entertaining, very kind of twisty and turny type deal. So I'm fascinated by how it's turned out, and I'm honestly wondering if there's another twist or turn in this whole thing.
All right, let's stay in the trenches on the offensive side of the ball in the ever-important center position. And I'm looking at Cortez Smith here. He's a 4-star from Parkview High School. Does he fit in the class? And maybe, do you think Cortez Smith could be the next to commit?
I think Cortez Smith has one of the safest spots in this Georgia class right now. I mean, Georgia loves him at center. Georgia needs a center. And I think Cortez Smith is the guy that they have kind of tabbed as the center of the future. I mean, he's a guy that he doesn't fit. When you look at a Georgia offensive line, look at the class Georgia signed in 2024, right? It was 6'6", 6'7", 340 pounds. Well, Cortez Smith is in that 6'2" range. He's 295, 300, maybe 310.
Right.
Obviously, you've got some different plans for that guy. Georgia likes that mold at center. They've used it really well. I mean, Jared Wilson's going to start for him this year in that mold. Cedric Van Pran was kind of in that role. Warren Erickson played center for Georgia. I mean, you go on and on. I think Cortez Smith has basically one of the safest, little tunnels into this Georgia class, and I do see him committing to Georgia next month.
Awesome. So he could be the next. So I just noticed we went really trench heavy. So Georgia fans, let's hear from you guys. Comment section below. Give your thoughts on who could be the next non-trench recruit to commit to Georgia. We want to hear it from you. Let us know. Comment section below. Well, you've made it to the end of today's video, but there's hundreds more videos on the On3 Recruits channel for you to check out. And also, while you're here, hit subscribe. I told you guys we're talking Julian Lewis from all angles this week. So today's video, we're going to approach it from the USC side of things. But also, the Trojans going on the offensive a little bit. They hosted a huge visit weekend of their own, which included a few flip targets. We're going to break it all down with Scott Schrader of We Are SC. But guys, before we get going, hit subscribe to the On3 Recruits channel. We talk a lot of USC recruiting on here, so go ahead, jump on board, hit subscribe. All right, let's bring in Scott Schrader. Now, Scott, we're going to start with offensive tackle Card Smith. He came in, committed to Auburn. He goes 6'6", 300 pounds. Now, he's from the state of Alabama, but he was out in L.A. this weekend. How did it go with USC?
I think the visit went really, really well. He was a guy that we really hadn't been talking a whole lot about, and Julian Lewis took his official visit to Auburn. All of a sudden, these guys at Auburn targets end up setting up business to USC, which seemed pretty coincidental, I guess.
Or
But
not.
or or not. It makes you wonder sometimes how this stuff goes on, right? There's so much. It would be fascinating, I think, sometimes to have somebody who like really tells the true stories about these things that goes on in some way. But anyway, the visit went exceptionally well. Again, you're talking about a guy from Mobile, Alabama. And Auburn is after this guy. He's committed. You've got other schools too that probably could get involved for all we know. But the visit went exceptionally well enough to where he said he's definitely going to be coming back for a game during the season. So regardless of how things end up going over the next few weeks, anytime these guys take a visit, it's always going to have some type of an impact immediately. But we'll see how things play out. But as of now, he plans on returning sometime in the fall.
All right. Now, there's also a lot of buzz around safety Kendarius Reddick. Now, he's from Thomasville, Georgia, but committed to UCF. How's things going coming out of his USC visit?
Yeah, I heard that visit also went really, really well, and just the feedback that I got prompted me to just submit a USC prediction. So, hopefully we're just making a comment on our message board yesterday to where for those of us covering recruiting these days, we know whatever take we put out could change in the next hour, the next day, the next week. But right now, I submitted a USC prediction, and they're feeling pretty strong about him.
All right, so we'll see a big flip in the works potentially. All right, let's talk some trench targets, guys that were uncommitted that came into USC official visit weekend and left. Well, we're going to find out. Offensive tackle Malachi Goodman was in town from New Jersey. They got a shot there?
I don't really know how good of a shot they have, but anytime they bring a guy in for an official visit, the feedback I get is they feel like they have a shot. So, we're still trying to learn a little bit about him. I think we'll probably will today at some point, maybe even in the next hour or two. But again, it'll sound repetitive, but yes, the visit went exceptionally well. This is the feedback some of the other guys. There were 5 commits, USC commits on this visit. The feedback was pretty positive, actually, on all these guys. And the feeling among the USC coaching staff was this was definitely by far the best visit overall too that they had for the 3 official visit weekends.
All right, now let's talk about a pair of defensive linemen that made a cross-country journey for their official visit to USC. That's Trajan Odom. He's out of North Carolina in defensive lineman, the number 1 defensive lineman in America, Elijah Griffin. Now, despite those other 2 decommits last week from the state of Georgia, Elijah Griffin followed through with his visit. What are you hearing on Odom and Griffin coming out of their trips to USC?
Yeah, they made a big impact with Trajan Odom. I think, and he's a guy that's USC, Ohio State, and Oregon. Right now, I'd probably be inclined to still think that it's probably going to end up being Ohio State. But we'll see how things go. Elijah Griffin, yeah, there's another one. You're lofty ambitions out here at USC, and he's the guy that it might not even be surprising if he's back in July. He's talking about coming back. At first, I thought that meant that it might be, some point during the season. But again, this is a situation. We'll see how things develop. My viewpoint is it's Georgia until it's not.
All right. Lastly, what we're all here for, JuJu Lewis. He took a visit to Boulder over the weekend. We saw all the photos. We saw everything coming out of there. Seemed like the whole city showed up for him. But what's your thoughts and what are you hearing on JuJu Lewis from a USC perspective now that the dead period's here?
Yeah, it was his recruitment was it was the gift that kept on giving for people that cover recruiting. Committed to USC last August 2nd. They really didn't have. I don't think they had a commitment until March 24th. So that was a long span that they had. They got some really, really strong commitments from a visit back in March, and which was Isaiah Gibson and Justice Terry and Drake Stubbs and some other guys. And some of these guys may not be committed here. Those 3 guys may all be committed somewhere else here in the future. But the feedback I'm getting is that there's just don't see a flip happening. So I think he's solid with his USC commitment. I think there is some concern still about the roster that USC can put together heading into the Big Ten. Obviously, Julian's not going to be there until next year, but there's still some concern about who USC is going to be able to sign ultimately.
Yeah. Do you think that we'll get some sort of finality from JuJu Lewis this summer that, hey, I'm shutting it down, I'm not going to take? Do you think that we'll hear from him before the season starts?
That was the plan, but I'm not 100% sure on that. I know ideally that's what USC would like. I think when you get some clarity on this is this is the guy. I don't know. I haven't gotten that far in the conversations yet, but I'm inclined to say that at some point, at least next month, I think we'll hear something.
Okay. All right. Well, USC fans, talk to me. How we feeling about the flip targets we spoke about? How we feeling about those trench targets we spoke about? And lastly, how you guys feeling about JuJu Lewis post Colorado visit? Still think he's locked into USC? Let me know. Comment section below. Well, you've made it to the end of today's video, but there's hundreds more videos on the On3 Recruits channel for you to check out. And also, while you're here, hit subscribe.